How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. How was your President's Day yesterday?
It was good. Yeah, we did a little mini vacation, got away, and yeah, it was great. Thanks for asking. Do you do anything?
Good.
Are you in the US or are you overseas? Because I know
Yeah,
some
no,
people are here in the US.
I'm based in the UK, so yeah, we didn't get out so much yesterday.
Okay. You didn't celebrate our President's Day? What?
No. Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Appreciate it. It'd be good. I guess if we could kick things off, starting back from the early days of Kirsten, talk us through where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, that sort of thing, and how you found your way into your early career at the United States Air Force and later on at NASA.
Yeah, so I have a story that goes way far back when we start talking about how I got into my career. When I was 3, I told an aunt of mine that I wanted to have my face painted as an astronaut. We were at some sort of fair, so there was face painting, and other people were probably getting like butterflies and things like that on their faces. And I asked to have mine painted like an astronaut. I don't know. I was 3. I don't know what I meant by
Love
that, but
that.
that is what I said. And she said that I was so, I think she used the word stubborn, but so stubborn at age 3 that she knew that I was going to end up working in the space field. And so I grew up with astronomy books and, I had a telescope and all the things. And eventually I wanted to go to space camp. And I was able to do that when I was in about 6th grade, which was around the time that she told me this story. She's like, I always knew that this is what you were going to end up doing. So I got to go to space camp, and at the time the shuttle was flying, they did simulations as part of the camp. And so half of your camp group is going to be astronauts on the shuttle, and half are going to be at mission control. And of course, I was like, I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to be working on the shuttle, and I got assigned to be part of mission control. And I was crestfallen
Yeah.
until I realized that the flight controllers are really the ones that are kind of calling the shots. At least in the simulation, that was very true. It is maybe not exactly like that in real life, but I thought, hey, I don't really care if I'm in space. That was never really what I was targeting. I just wanted to work around space things. And my language for that as a young kid was to be an astronaut. So this opened up my idea of what I could do. And I thought, well, I'm going to go be a flight controller. So in 6th grade, I said, I'm going to go be a flight controller for NASA. And I decided in 6th grade that I was going to go to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I was going to get an aerospace engineering degree. And that's what I did. I thought I might go to the Air Force Academy at one point, but that took a different turn. And I did go to Embry-Riddle, got my aerospace engineering degree, and graduated just a little bit after the Columbia accident happened. So at that time, we weren't sure as a nation whether or not we were going to continue the shuttle program, what was going to happen. And there was a big pause in hiring flight controllers because you don't know what's going to happen with the program.
Yeah.
So I took a job at Arnold Air Force Base. I grew up in Tennessee. Arnold Air Force Base is in Tennessee, and they do space and missiles testing there. So I was able to kind of get a little bit of experience. I was a project manager. I tested re-entry materials for space applications, did that for a couple of years, and then said, okay, I've done this for a couple of years. They are flying the shuttle again, and I want to go be a flight controller. So I was able to get my job at NASA as a flight controller. I started off on the shuttle program. And then as the shuttle started to retire or entered into that phase, I transitioned over to the International Space Station and did that for a few years.
Amazing. I mean, it's super rare for something to be sparked so young in life. I
Right.
think a lot of people go through things that I think they probably uncover certain strengths and maybe fall into different aspects of the
Sure.
career industry and everything else. Do you remember what it was before even the face painting situation? What it was that you saw or heard that kind of like even sparked that in you to want to go down that route?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure I had been watching shuttle launches. I'm not sure. Both of my parents had been in the Air Force. So I'm sure that we were just watching things that were related to the space program, just because there is a little bit of overlap between Air Force and the space industry. So it was probably just from my parents and being around things like that. We lived at the time, we were on an Air Force base. We were at McCord Air Force Base in Washington. So
Yeah,
goodness knows what I saw there. Yeah.
amazing. Love it. And I guess taking us up to the current day, could you give an overview to our listeners about what Max Space do where how you guys fit into the space ecosystem, and where do you see the company going over the next 5 years?
Sure. So MaxSpace is designing and building expandable modules. And I choose the word expandable because some people use inflatable, but I think inflatables indicates for people that it's going to pop. It's like a balloon. But expandables are not like that at all. They're very rigid structures by the time you get them in orbit and pressurize them. So we're building these expandable modules for various applications. Moon and Mars are really great applications for expandable modules because you can launch something that's very compact and then provide a lot of volume on orbit without having to launch something very heavy, without having to use the full rocket to do that. So you can get a lot more volume on your Moon Mars applications, whether maybe using that in a hybrid application where you have metallic modules that are just expanded then with these expandable modules. That's an application. We're also looking at some applications for the Department of Defense and possibly orbital debris removal applications with the modules, and perhaps being part of one of the CLDs.
Nice, perfect. And I guess now that you've been, since getting into the Air Force and then NASA, now that you've been in the space ecosystem across all these different segments and everything else, what is it that you like most about being in the space sector? What is it that you've come to love most about it, and why you've been in it for so long?
I think I would just say that it's the possibility of what space offers. And I think it depends on where you're at in the space ecosystem, because there are satellites and communication providers, and we all use the end product of that. When we hold our phone in our hand today, the GPS satellites are giving us the map directions. They're helping our DoorDash deliveries get here on time. They're helping us with our Uber rides. So it's just part of our life. But imagine what our life would be like if we didn't have those things.
Yeah.
And then imagine where we're going to go in the next 20 or 30 years. When I was young, that 3-year-old getting her face painted as an astronaut, we could have never predicted that we would be holding these phones that would have guided so much of our lives. So goodness knows where we're going to go in the next 30 years. I'm not a futurist. I can't predict those things, but I imagine we'll look back and go, hey, I was on this podcast with EVONA and I had no idea that we were going to do fill in the blank. But there's also the applications of, cancer research. There's so much that's being done in space that can benefit humanity. And I think that is what's just truly remarkable about this field. There's so much that you can do to expand our knowledge, to improve humanity, and to explore the universe. So and you can play in all of those fields, right? Like if you're a power systems person, you can do any of this stuff. You can be part of these projects that do any of it. And then there's other ways to get involved in various aspects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you mentioned something there. I use that example a lot, the DoorDash example, because that was going to kind of segue into my next question around what can we do to kind of make space more accessible, because a lot of people don't know that stuff. In terms of actually going into the schools, colleges, universities, and trying to kind of pull the curtain back and make space accessible, I think is about making it relatable as well to those kids, but also people in different industries that, DoorDash, Uber, they're space companies too. So with that being said, what do you feel in terms of making space more accessible overall? Is there anything you feel we should and could be doing differently at kind of that STEM level schools to try and make space more accessible going into the classrooms? What could and should we be doing differently to try and make space a more accessible career for our younger generation?
It's a great question. I have two kids, both daughters. One's in high school and one's in 5th grade. And so the 5th grader and I were talking about this probably about a year ago. And I was just amazed that she doesn't really think space is cool. So let me just start there. And I guess I get it for her because her mom works in the space industry. And so it's not this sort of unattainable cool thing, right? Mom does it. So that's not something that's
it can't be cool.
Right, exactly. Like by default, it's not cool. But also as we drive around Houston, because we're based in Houston, just down the road from me is Space Center Houston that has a shuttle outside and you can see rockets. And it's just normal, I think, for kids in the Houston area. Probably half of your friends have parents that work at NASA or a NASA related company. So for kids in this area, it's not necessarily unique. So I was talking to my youngest daughter about this and just trying to sort of get her to understand that it is unique and that without space, there's so much that you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have the DoorDash, you wouldn't have MapQuest or the map directions on your phone. And she thought, well, that's interesting. She didn't know. I'm like, well, what can we do? What can we do to get kids engaged and excited? And she's like, yeah, you got to make it more hands-on. So she has been in classrooms where astronauts have called down and have talked to the kids in the class. Again, I think it's because of the area that we're in, and they've seen it and they've done that and they've talked to an astronaut, and that's old hat. So exposure to that one thing where you're talking to the astronauts is not opening up the rest of this field. They don't understand the rest of it. So I think we have to somehow approach it from that angle, right? So we have to get people in there. Maybe at the schools it is inviting the Ubers and the DoorDashes and things like that to talk about it versus the astronauts. And I think that's counterintuitive for some of us who grew up with astronauts as our heroes. I think it's become so commonplace that maybe that's not always the case anymore. And we have to think about, how do we get the other people in, the YouTubers, the Roblox people? That's who speaks to this generation. And if we can connect those things to the kids and connect those to space, then you've got this captive audience who is going to think, oh, that's super cool, and I want to do what that YouTuber does, which is work on space stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key. I think making it relatable at that level as well. And I mean, even now, I've only been doing this 7 years, but even now when I speak to friends, family, as soon as I say space, the immediate perception is astronauts, rocket science, astrophysicists. So yeah, couldn't agree more. And I guess just staying on that theme of the younger generation, you mentioned you got 2 daughters. I've got 2 daughters myself as well, 10 and 7. Sooner or later, they're going to get to grips with this whole social media world, where you see a lot of the highlight reel stuff, you know, the end goal, the achievement, the finish line, the celebration. With all those kind of various social media platforms available today, people don't really see the grind and the hustle and the dedication, the sacrifice behind it into building a business and making that successful. What would you say is your biggest lesson learned today, or your biggest failure in career where you've really learned from it? And on the other side of that coin, what would you consider as your biggest achievement so far?
Yeah, I think the failure it's an interesting one. And I think definitely we can all be more transparent about the issues that we've encountered and how to uncover those and move on. And I think one of the things I have learned very recently is just, you can't always change other people. And I know that sounds, it sounds almost too simplistic, but sometimes working in these space startups, and that is a lot of the industry, you're going to be thrown together with teams it's really hard to get them to come together. And sometimes that's not going to work out. And sometimes you have to call it sooner rather than later that that's not working out for you or for the team or whatever. So I would say that that's one of my biggest lessons learned of, it's not always going to be something that is, it's not always going to be something that works, and it's not always your fault that it doesn't work. Sometimes it is just a situation that you're in. And yeah, it's okay if you need to move on and find something else. It's okay if you need to make changes in that team if you're the leader, that's not working out for the team. That's okay. You don't have to just keep beating your head against the wall to try to make it work and make it fit some mold. It's okay. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to get other people in the door, whatever needs to happen for that situation. And that's probably a lesson, honestly, that I've learned in various ways across my career. And I'm hoping now I can just actually learn it and move forward with that. As far as what am I most proud of? Actually, one of my most proud moments is not really a space story, but I'll go back to my sort of defense story, and I'll try to relate to things. I walked into my defense job at Pratt & Whitney, which is part of Raytheon, and was assigned to a specific Air Force. And they'd had an issue that had been open for 10 years, and nobody had closed that book. If you talk to the people at Pratt & Whitney, they'd say, nope, we've closed this. We've given them what they need. It's done. And if you talk to the customer, they're like, no, it's still open. Well, as I listened, and I was only like a few months on the job, as I listened to the customer's frustration with our engineering team, I realized the engineers on the customer side understand, but the pilots don't. And so I have an idea. We have this free program for pilots, and it's called Pilot Awareness Briefing. And I'm gonna use that pilot awareness briefing to close this issue. And so I worked with my counterpart, and we sort of plotted together, and we did close the issue after 10 years. And so I think the application here is like sometimes things are just really sticky and they take a long time.
Yeah.
But if you can come at it from a different perspective, look at it just a little bit differently, maybe ask different questions that have been asked before, it's surprising what you can accomplish. I don't know that I'll ever top something that's been 10 years old that I closed that had impacted that customer's fleet so much. That's a pretty big deal to me. But I have a lot of other things too, of contracts that I've been able to negotiate, and being part of the first mission at Axiom is also really cool. Being able to say I was there for that and I supported it. So I have a lot of neat stories, but I always default back to that 10-year-old open issue of just like, it just took me to ask different questions and come in with a different perspective. And then we were all happy because our engineers didn't have to talk about it anymore. Customer got what they wanted. Pretty cool.
Yeah, amazing. Channeling the young, inner, stubborn Kirsten to ask the questions that nobody else answered to get the answers you needed. And go back to what you were saying as well around the lesson you learned. I mean, I think we all go through that. I think especially when you're building a business, I myself, I think when you've got your head down and you're running 100 miles per hour and you're building a business and you're doing so many different things, I think we all kind of have this false expectation that why isn't everyone else like this? Like, why is this so hard? Like, why? Like, I think you assume that everyone should work that way and they should be like you in that. But I think I'm only just starting to realize it now. Really, it's like everybody is so different. It doesn't mean you're right or wrong. Everyone just works in different ways.
I think that's a great way of putting it. It doesn't mean that you're right or wrong. It doesn't mean that that team isn't going to be successful either. I think you have to really take a step back sometimes and just sort of divorce yourself from that environment and go, okay, what's really the issue? What's really not working here? And being like sort of not passionate about it, just very objective. What's not working? And from that objectiveness, you can go, okay, this is what I need to do here. But I think that's because, when you care, and you're probably the same way when you care, you're in it, your heart and soul's in it, it can be a little hard to understand what's really not working.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for anybody that's listening to this podcast now and still has that perception that it is all astronauts and it's all astrophysicists, and they just feel, and like I said, I'm not just exclusively talking about the younger generation here. It might be someone who's in an adjacent industry or a completely different industry. They're in law, they're in, automotive or whatever it is. Are there any particular resources that you kind of identified along your journey that maybe you've utilized well over the years, whether it be, courses, programs, mentors maybe you've had along the way that's kind of helped you transition into the space sector?
Yeah, I wish I could say I have all these resources, but I think for me it has been such a journey, that like narrow focused journey from day one, really, of I'm gonna just go do this. But I will say I think mentors is a really great way of looking at it. I didn't know anybody growing up that worked in the space industry. So I was just off doing it by myself. But that same aunt did know somebody that worked at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And so I was very young, and she got me a call with this engineer. And I can still remember talking to him. I don't remember what we talked about, but I think just being able, now that we have LinkedIn, just reach out and connect with some people that are in the field that might hold a similar position to what you could hold. Let's say you are a lawyer. You can find a space lawyer. I guarantee you, type space lawyer into LinkedIn, you'll find some people. Reach out, connect, ask questions. Most people I have found, because I do this a fair bit in LinkedIn, even now, most people I have found are at least willing to have a message conversation with you. And I would say about 25% will also set up a call. Not everybody will. Some people are busy. Some people are introverts and just not good at, taking that next step.
Yeah.
But 25% of people will set up a call with you is my finding. Maybe you're going to be more, depending on what your background is. Have that quick phone call with them. Ask them how they got into it. Ask them what specific skills that they needed to have their job in space, or is it completely transferable? Like if you're an accountant, I'm going to guess it's probably pretty transferable. An accountant at one place is going to be able to be an accountant for a space company if you're fine. Legal could probably be a little bit different. It depends on what you're doing. I mean, if you're really working on space policy, you're probably going to need some specific training and skills there. But if you're general counsel for a space company, maybe not, right? Like you'd have to ask a lawyer that question. But network, ask questions, find people that are a little bit like you in the space industry, and then just find out what steps you need to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And going what you just said there about messaging people, reaching out to people, I mean, that's certainly been my experience since I've been in the space sector. And even not just on LinkedIn, even when I've gone to the shows, gone to, Satellite in DC and the symposium, all that kind of stuff, everybody is so welcoming. And everyone is so willing to talk to you. And I think one is because they're super passionate about what they do, but everyone's just very open and welcoming and willing to help each other, which is something I've loved most about the space sector the last 7 years. So yeah, absolutely. And I guess the final question for me today, Kirsten, is that, again, someone listening to this, whether they're technical or non-technical background, looking to kind of get into the space sector this year and beyond, what would be your one piece of advice to that person listening that wants to get into the space sector?
I almost hate to just repeat the advice about networking, but I think it's important. I think finding people that are in the field, talking to them about their experiences, and then trying to marry that with what your experience is. Because I think you've sort of hit on it. Not everybody understands that their skills are transferable. Like what you're doing in the automotive industry may 100% be transferable. So asking those questions of people that have very similar positions, trying to figure out what your skill set is and what your value proposition is to the market, because goodness knows there's somebody out there probably looking for you and your skill set. So you can find that out by, again, networking, asking questions, looking at job postings, and trying to sort of read the tea leaves. And then being able to come at it from a perspective of saying, well, I know you didn't really ask for this, but I have all this skill set, because we in the space industry don't always know what other skills people could be bringing to us. We're coming from well, this is what we're looking for. But yeah, if somebody came to me with this value proposition of what they could offer me, that could be really helpful and attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Excellent. Well, Kirsten, thanks ever so much for taking the time today. It's been great to speak to you. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of your week. And thanks ever so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks, Kirsten.
All right. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.